Chapter 4 Part 2 of Find the Woman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Find the Woman by Gelett Burgess. Chapter 4 Part 2. The iteration of the name Belle Charmion smote upon John Fenton's ears like the ringing of a bell far away in some secret chamber of his mind, behind some locked door. Why should that name excite him? He did not know. It seemed to be vaguely familiar, but he could place it nowhere in his memory. He was puzzling over it when his attention was called to the next speaker of the evening. Then suddenly a new thought excited him. The man addressed by the president was a cross-eyed, coarse-faced individual who, by the cut of his coat and the battered top hat on the back of his head, was indubitably a cab driver. Immediately Fenton's mind went back to the octoroon's story. She had been pursued by a cross-eyed cabman. Could this be the man? Fenton listened eagerly to see if anything in his speech would confirm this surmise. "This is a perfectly true story," the cabman was saying. "Stop there!" the president thundered. "If a story is funny, it's not true, and if it's true, it's not funny. That principle has been proved in this club beyond peradventure. Cut out this 'I knew the man that died' stuff. We want no true stories here. We want good ones. Wherever a good story travels, there's always some fool who wants to tack it on to some maternal aunt of his, and 10 to 1 he actually believes what he says. All good stories come from Herodotus, and the best we can do is to cut 'em over to a 1911 model, touch 'em up with rouge and powder, and send 'em out as the latest. No man can invent a good story, but he can improve a poor one. No true tale is fit to tell. The naked truth must be adorned." Peter Stowe, the pigeon fancier, awoke from his doze. "Well, is this a Browning Club or not?" he asked sleepily. "Why not play ball?" "I second the motion," said the chauffeur. The president nodded, and the cab driver shifted his cigar from one corner of his mouth to the other, and began. The Sleepy Bridegroom. It was a funny story how young Michael Carnarvon got married. I never heard of such a wedding in my life. You see, young Carnarvon was really what you might call roped in. The Schufelt girl was a manicure working in the Hotel Persimmon, and from the day she laid eyes on him she began to wire things up to marry him. I suppose all women do that one way or another. She done it by listening instead of talking. When he began to call on her, she lived over on Charles Street with her mother, she kept him talking about himself till he thought she was the cleverest girl in New York, which in some ways she was. What with playing the innocent sympathetic, keeping her mother out of the way, and padlocking her temper, which was something savage, she got him going till he popped the question. She certainly managed it great. Carnarvon's folks was wild when they heard about the engagement, but by this time he was deaf and blind to the fact that the Schufelt girl was only after his money, and had the reputation around Chelsea Village of being a regular Rocky Mountain catamount when she got mad. Lord, it must have been a strain for that girl to hold her tongue sometimes, but she never boiled over till after the wedding. You'd have thought she was half-witted almost. She was so tame when Carnarvon was around, but Lord, how her mother used to catch it when he left the flat. And her mother could put up a pretty good jaw fight, too. Well, 3 days before the wedding, Carnarvon had to work like a donkey engine to get his business straightened up, so he could get off on his honeymoon. He was at the office night and day, working himself to a frazzle. In that time he hadn't slept more than 3 or 4 hours all told, and on the morning of his marriage he was about as near all in as a man can be, and keep awake. In fact, he couldn't keep awake, and that was the trouble. They tell me that last forenoon he was practically walking and talking in his sleep. Black coffee didn't do no good at all, for he'd been living on it for a week practically. He dictated his letters staggering up and down the room, and every time he sat down at the desk to sign his name to him, the typewriter had to stick hat pins into him to wake him up. He took snuff to make him sneeze. He washed his face in cold water every 10 minutes. He kept the windows wide open. Everything he could think of to brace him up. But he just naturally got drowsier and drowsier every minute. They was things that simply had to be done if he was going to get off next day, and so he kept to it till late in the afternoon. So dopey he couldn't talk American. Blub blub was about all he could say. It was something awful. His clerks implored him to let them finish up, but he didn't dare trust them, so he stuck to the ship. At 6 o'clock he was like a living corpse, half blind with sleep, yawning continually and having to be hauled up off the floor every 5 minutes. He was living on sheer nerve. Blind staggers was nothing to it. But he left to go home, declining help from the boys, and of course owing to ructions in his family, not likely to get much assistance when he did get there. Well, on the way home he dropped in at a drugstore for a dose of something, strychnia or some such stuff, to brace him up through the ceremony. After that he didn't care, just so long as he made good with the minister. How he asked for the dope I don't know. He must have said something about sleeping, I suppose. But anyway, the clerk thought he wanted a sleeping draught, and he gave him what turned out to be a 20% solution of morphine. See? There he was, hardly able to see straight anyway, with a double dose of dope on top of it. He took a cab home, and the driver had to pry him out of the seat when they got there. He crawled upstairs, wondering how he was ever going to make it that evening. His medicine didn't seem to help much, so he took another swig at it. How he ever got his clothes on, his man can't exactly explain. It was a job for an undertaker, not a valet. But after a regular nightmare of it, Carnarvon started for the Schufelt flat. He didn't dare take a cab this time for fear he'd be found asleep and they think he was drunk, so he walked. It must have been horrible. Most of the time he staggered along with his eyes shut, hoping he'd run into somebody who'd punch him in the head or give him a good kick to wake him up. No such luck. Well, he got to the Schufelt flat somehow, and just before going in he emptied the bottle in hopes it would carry him through the ceremony. That last dose made him feel as if he was living inside a blanket soaked in molasses with his arms and legs tied. Lord, that man was game. He just got in, and that was about all, for he stumbled on the first rug, fell feet down on the floor, and began to snore. Mrs. Schufelt picked him up, and she and Nanny lugged him into a bedroom and tried to wake him up. By this time he was just muttering to himself something like, "I don't give a dern for anything. I'm tired of swimming through jelly. Blub, blub, blub. I want to lay down and die decent." Of course they thought he was drunk. What else was they to think? But so long as she was safely spliced to him, Nanny didn't care. She was determined not to make a miss of it, and as soon as she was Mrs. Michael Carnarvon, she knew she'd give him a tongue lashing that would sober him up. So they slapped wet towels at his face, stepped on his toes, tickled the soles of his feet, used a few needles, brushed up his hair backwards, and dragged him in to greet the friends of the family. Wow! He tried to crawl on his hands and knees, but they wouldn't have it. Everybody thought it was a disgrace, but he was rich, and that always explains a lot. After he was introduced to the minister, he melted down into a chair, shut his eyes, and opened his mouth. Nanny pinched him good. He got up in a kind of trance, fell into Mother Schufelt's sister's lap, stepped into the rubber plant, upset a table full of wedding presents, and then the old lady decided to hurry things and get the agony over. How she induced the minister to do the job I don't know. Perhaps it was the $100 bill Carnarvon had in his vest pocket did the trick. Anyway, they propped him up on each side and one behind, and the parson done his act. Everybody present swore afterwards that they heard him say, "I will," and as soon as it was over he collapsed, and they laid him out on a sofa and covered him up with a tablecloth while Nanny changed her clothes. The guests went into the dining room to feed and drink his health. Now whether it was the champagne young Carnarvon had paid for, or just the natural tendency of wedding guests to play the goat, I dunno. But anyway, they fixed up a joke on the happy pair. There was one cut up there, a rising young plumber he was, named O'Square. The first I knew of the thing, he come round to my stand and wanted to hire my hack. It was him what put me on to the whole thing. He was fairly busting with it. He offered me $20 for the use of my cab and my hat and overcoat, and I surrendered. Naturally, I followed round the corner to see the fun. He sent away the taxicab Carnarvon had waiting, and went upstairs to see if all was ready. The rest of them had everything fixed. They got young Carnarvon downstairs, holding him up the way you do a drunk, and they rammed him into the cab. Then they brought down Nanny, who was beginning to talk. Lord, you ought to have heard her remarks. They was something bloodthirsty. The guests only screamed and laughed at her. O'Square got on the box. We all tied up the trunks with ribbons, and off they went, Nanny's language dripping out of that cab like a leaky watering cart. O'Square brought back my cab toward 1 o'clock next morning. He didn't say nothing, but I heard afterward that he dumped 'em out. Carnarvon dead asleep, Nanny fighting mad, and the trunks covered with old boots and white ribbons on a little crossroad in the middle of Van Cortlandt Park. That was his idea of a joke. What happened after that I don't know, except that a week afterward Michael Carnarvon brought suit for the annulment of his marriage, on the grounds that he was asleep during the ceremony. The cross-eyed cabman paused and felt in his inside coat pocket. If you don't believe it, he remarked, look at this thing here. I found it tucked into a nook in the seat cushion of my cab when I cleaned her out the next day. He held up a locket, heart-shaped, with a star of white stones. It flashed like a handful of sparks in that smoky, dusty room. I ain't sure it was Carnarvon's wedding present to his wife, he explained. It wasn't never advertised for, and so I never said nothing about it. You know us cab drivers has got to have some perquisites. The suspicions which had arisen in Fenton's mind at first sight of the cross-eyed cab driver were confirmed long before the story was finished. As it progressed, Fenton was amazed at the man's audacity in weaving in point after point the facts of the octoroon's narrative. The sleepy bridegroom could, of course, be none other than the dead fair, Gordon Brewster. The picture which the cabby had seen as he watched from a nearby corner was almost the identical one the octoroon had described. The tragic truth disguised in this comedy recital. As chorus after chorus of guffaws applauded the tale, Fenton wondered at the cleverness of the man who was, no doubt, adapting some old narrative to fit the needs of his case. At sight of the locket, however, Fenton's thoughts took a new turn. The ornament had a mystery of its own connected in some incomprehensible way with his own life. He had but a glimpse of it as it was displayed, but he was sure there was no mistake. It was exactly the same as the one he recalled first during that half-forgotten scene on the ferry boat when he was a mere child, afterward in the O'Shea's tenement, after they had come to New York. What did it mean? How did the cabby really get it? There was only one possible answer. Undoubtedly, it was one of the Brewster jewels, spilled out of the traveling bag, as the octoroon had said, while the dead body was being driven to 72nd Street. If so, the cabby's suspicions of queer work must have gained ground. He had, perhaps, already communicated with the police. At any rate, Fenton now had a double reason for wanting to gain possession of it, and he was determined that at the first opportunity he would attempt to get it. He would watch his chance. With all this flashing through his mind, it did not take him long to perceive that he could not safely tell his own story before the driver. Once he was connected with the jewels, the cabby would be on his track. He determined, therefore, to invent some fantastic tale, anything would do, which might rescue him from his embarrassing dilemma. The cabman's story suggested a plot. It was vague, but he relied upon inspiration for some amusing narrative. His mind was already busy upon the fiction when he was called upon for his contribution to the evening's entertainment. "We have with us tonight," said the president, impressively, "hooray!" from the circle of auditors, "a newcomer to our glorious midst. As an amateur liar we expect little, and yet the gentleman's costume warrants some hope of amusement." He turned to Fenton. "Now, Barelegs, you can spiel your tale. What's all this about being robbed of $17 million worth of diamonds, anyway? Make it short, for we're getting tired, and don't spare the ginger. We need to be waked up. All ready? Fire away." He sat down. Everyone looked at Fenton and laughed again. He did not, in truth, present a very dignified aspect. The blood and egg yolk had dried upon his shins, and he had brushed some of the dirt from his coat, but there was excuse enough for mirth. "He looks like a bum Highland scavenger," was the chauffeur's comment. Fenton invoked the muse of comedy and rose to his feet. "Of course that yarn about the stolen millions was all a bluff. I wanted to get away quick, and when you hear my lively tale you'll understand why I didn't care to explain just how many different kinds of a fool I was to our friend, the aged pigeon charmer here. It was bad enough as it was, but I see you're all good fellows, and perhaps if I throw myself wide open you may be moved to help me out. The fact is, also, that the cabbie's story is just enough like mine to encourage me to go ahead and tell the truth." He was proud of himself. Already he had made an impression. From the looks of the men he knew he had his audience, and it inspired him. He gave free rein to imagination, therefore, and warming gradually to his lie, he began the story. "The 3 weddings. I am going to be married tonight, if you fellows will help me out. That will explain why I touch lightly on parts of the narrative. I haven't much time to lose if I'm to capture my blushing bride, the pride of Harlem, a lady you'll excuse me for denominating Miss Daisy Peach. The name doesn't matter, for I expect it to be Howich by 12:1 tomorrow morning. My name's Claude Kensington Van Prool Howich, age 21. All right, skip the love at first sight stuff. Skip the coy proposal and lovers' quarrels. Skip the violets and confectionery. Most all men make love alike. Every chap thinks his chicken is a bird of paradise. The only difference is, I know mine is." The story, therefore, boils down to a question of too much mother-in-law before marriage. By too much I merely insinuate that she was too much for me. Why? She wanted Daisy to marry 6 foot of blonde Englishman with a decorated name. Call him the Honorable Algernon Mudd. That'll do fine. Daisy, being foolish about me, said nay, nay, and set the date for our nuptials. In fact, she named the day 3 times. Let's take 'em chronologically, which, being interpreted, O grave and reverend signors, means each by 1. Wedding number 1. Parson ready? 4,000,000 guests of the bride arrived. Presents set out, labeled and guarded by detectives in the billiard room. House decorated. Floral arch, orange blossoms galore, potted plants, orchids, little sisters in silk voile carrying baskets of rose leaves to walk on. In short, everything but the happy groom, which was me, who was fighting his way into an elephant's dress suit many miles away. No wedding bells for her. Puzzle. Here's the answer. Wedding was to be at 9. My best man, thinking me sane, sober, and responsible, had promised to call at 8 with a taxi. At 6:30, as I thought, I began to dress for the execution. Now, though I may not look it in my present war paint, I keep a valet, or rather I share him with 4 other chaps. Up to date, that valet had been an expert, but at 7 o'clock he began to go crazy. 1. Spilt a bottle of mucilage inside my union suit. You know, no man wants to wear another kind of skin. 2. Couldn't find a clean suit. Valet had to hike out and buy one. Red flannels was all he could find. and me to be married at 9. 3. Upset the ink all over my King of Broadway dress shirt. Found every other white shirt was 3 sizes too small. Never had been before. Again to the haberdasher's. Haberdasher closed. Had to put on a soft silk arrangement, like the leading man in a musical comedy. 4. Laid down my dress coat on some sticky flypaper we had there to catch early crop of mosquitoes. 5. Went to telephone and found the thing was struck deaf and dumb. I was furious by this time, paranoiac, ready to chew glass and spit blood. You may wonder why I didn't tumble before this, and suspect my valet. I suppose it was because I was dreaming of my beauteous bride. Anyway, it wasn't till I sent him out to a friend to borrow a black suit that I began to think anything. Then I went out to the elevator boy and asked the time. It was 9:25. That blasted menial had put back my watch, and all the clocks an hour and a half. Well, by that time I was seeing red. I went down the hall and pounded at every door, begging for a dress suit. Nobody at home, or only shocked females who barricaded the entrance. At last I found a Dutchman who let me in, and offered me a suit he had owned for 13 years. I took it to my place and got into it. I wrapped it around me, so to speak. I got lost in it. Fit? It would have fitted a dinosaurus better. It flapped and waved about me. I looked like the last potato in the sack. But it was my last hope, and in that mass of black broadcloth I made my appearance at the Mansion de Peach, to find every guest gone, the old man swearing mad, mother-in-law to be calm as an iceberg, and my Daisy in tears. How I squared myself I don't know. I sent Miss Peach all the violets in the world, and we postponed the wedding for a week. I promised to be careful. When I got back I found my valet waiting as cool as a marble-top table. I promised not to murder him if he'd tell me exactly why he did it. What do you think? Honorable Mudd had tipped him $100 to queer me for the festivity. Well, it was worth knowing. Somewhere around the conspiracy I smelled my mother-in-law, but I couldn't follow up the trail. Wedding number 2. No valet this time, you bet. My best man on guard, buttoning me up and giving good advice, telephoning to Central for the time every 10 minutes. I was all ready to start at 8 o'clock when the bell rang like an alarm clock. We didn't hurry, and bing! The door was nearly blown in. Best man opens the door. Enter a hoity-toity chorus girl, made up for leading ingenue, and one big, bull-necked policeman. That's him, says Tootsie Footlights, and the cop lays a fist like a ham on my shoulder. What do you think? Tootsie sprang a song about my having stolen $600 and banged her eye at Jack's 2 nights before. Said we were engaged, but it was all off, and arrest him, Mr. Officer. He's handsome, but he's false. Protests from yours affectionately. Heap big talk from best man. No go. Officer McUgly shows a warrant for my arrest. I'm properly identified, and if I want to go to the station in a taxi I can. Otherwise he'll call for the patrol. I tried to coax him with a 50, but it wouldn't work. My best man flew loose on a search for bail, and I made the journey to jail. The sergeant winked when I told the marriage story. I telephoned I'd arrive at the Peach Palace in a minute, but before we raised the $100 bail, the wedding was a fizzle. Simultaneously, Tootsie Footlights wired in she'd found the ring inside one of her rats, and she wouldn't prosecute. Who was Tootsie? Hired by Honorable Mudd, of course, like the valet. She came round afterward and told me all about it, giggling, and tried to get me to take her out to dinner. She had a nerve like a frog. No? Yes? Well, such are the petted favorites of the mimic world. The next day I got a session of live wire talk from Daisy Peach that gave me the shivers. See here, Claude, she says, I'm getting tired of getting married on the installment plan. I know that Ma and Mr. Mudd are trying to queer you, but if you can't beat a pink Englishman out on a game like this, I'll be darned if I don't marry the Briton, for he's the cleverest man of the two. I like you, Claude, and in times of peace you seem to make good, but the war is on, and I'm going to marry the victor. We'll get married on the 30th of April, and I'll give you this last chance. I am aware that Mr. Mudd may have cooked up a good one this time to put you out of business, but if you can't defend yourself after being warned, you're no good to me as a husband. I can't use that kind. So I'll give you till midnight to show up. When the clock strikes 12, if you're not visible to the naked eye, I'll become Mrs. Mudd and begin to train for high society in Surrey and that townhouse in Park Lane. Goodbye, boyo. I'll always be a sister if he wins, but I do hope you won't be lost in the shuffle again. Wedding number 3. All goes well till 6 p.m. of the fatal day, today. I had laid in 3 dress suits, a small gents' furnishing shop, a couple of welterweight thugs from Casey's, and my best man and I each had a magazine pistol ready. At 6 the telephone bell rings and Ma Peach croons out her siren song. Daisy, she said, had cold toes over something. Would I come right over to see her, or else the match would be off? She had sent the limousine. See the game? Yes? No? What could I do? Disobey the summons of the Queen of the Solar System, my brave, sweet Daisykins? Not so. I fell for it. Out I walked through my barricades, jumped into the limousine. The minute I was in, 2 large adult men jumped in after me, one on each side. I had no time to put up a fight before they got to my nose with chloroform, and well, I woke up in our friend's pigeon ranch, with my trousers gone. A quick finish? By Juno, yes. Now, gents, I put it to you. Are you going to allow me to lose a 26-carat bride at the last moment for want of 5 cents and a pair of trousers? Seriously, my friends, I'm in a hole. I ask you, man to man, help me out. I can make it yet. Are you willing to stand for me or not? If you ever were married, you know how nervous a man is. I believe, honest, I've a temperature of 104 this blessed minute. For Cupid's sake, give me a lift. If I had a hat I'd pass it around. I only need pants and a taxi. What do you say? Fenton paused and looked anxiously around at the members of the Liars Club. End of chapter 4.